The man who already knew the building. The elevator on the freight side had been drifting since Tuesday. Marcus Del Rey noticed it the way he noticed most things in this building. Quietly, without announcing that he'd noticed, filing it somewhere behind his eyes where it would stay until it became useful. The drift was subtle. A half-second delay between the door sensor registering a clear threshold and the doors actually beginning to close. Most people wouldn't catch it. Most people weren't looking. Marcus was always looking, even when he appeared to be doing nothing more than pushing a yellow mop bucket down a hallway at 11:40 on a Thursday night. He was on the 4th floor when the call came through his earpiece. Not a call, really. Just Dion from the security desk doing his check-in the way he did every 45 minutes, because it gave him something to do between rounds. "All clear up there, Mr. Del Rey?" "All clear," Marcus said. He turned the corner past the glass-walled conference room, the one they'd renovated in 2019, knocking out the original load-bearing partition that had made the room feel smaller, but it also muffled sound from the server room 2 doors down. A trade-off that the interior designer had not understood and that Marcus had flagged in writing before quietly being told the decision had already been made. The new glass looked good. He could admit that. "You find the thing I was telling you about?" Dion asked. "On 6, the water stain by the elevator bank." "Found it. It's not a stain. It's condensation from the HVAC return duct. The insulation wrap on the elbow joint is separating, probably been going for about 3 weeks. Marcus wrung out the mop head and started on the stretch of linoleum near the kitchenette. "Someone should put in a maintenance ticket before it drips onto the cable tray below it." A pause from Dion. "How do you know where the cable tray is?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He worked the mop in a slow figure 8 the way his lower back preferred these days, a concession to being 44 and to having spent 6 months sleeping on a cot in a hospital waiting room when he was 36. "Building's been around a while," he said finally. "Things like that you start to notice." It was the kind of answer that was true enough to stop a question without answering it. He finished the 4th floor in 23 minutes, which was 8 minutes faster than the schedule required, which meant he had time to take the back stairwell up to 5 rather than waiting for the main elevator. He preferred the stairwell. The stairwell was original to the 1987 construction, poured concrete and steel handrail, and it smelled like the building's real self. Not the coffee and dry-cleaned wool of the upper floors, not the recycled air optimism of the lobby, but something older and more honest. The smell of structure doing what it was built to do. He was halfway up the stairs when he heard the click of heels on the landing above him. He stepped to the right, automatically, muscle memory from years of moving out of the way, and kept climbing, expecting whoever it was to pass him heading down. Instead, the footsteps stopped. "Excuse me," he looked up. The woman was standing at the 5th floor landing holding the door half open with one hand and a tablet with the other. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry except for small gold studs, the kind of restrained put together that people who had real power tended toward once they stopped feeling the need to prove it. He'd seen her before in passing, twice, once in the lobby at a bad hour, and once on the security monitor feed that Dion occasionally tilted toward Marcus when something seemed worth noting. Nadia Voss, CEO, 14 months into the job, brought in from outside to turn around a firm that had grown profitable, but also, by most accounts, sloppy. "Is the freight elevator working?" she asked. Not unfriendly. Practical. "It's working," Marcus said. "There's a sensor drift on the door close. I'd give it another week before it becomes a real problem." She looked at him with the particular attention of someone who had learned to calibrate other people quickly. "Have you put in a ticket?" "I mentioned it to Building Services Tuesday. They're backed up." "What would fix it in the meantime?" "Manually resetting the door logic controller. Takes about 4 minutes if you know where the panel is." He paused. "Building Services probably doesn't know where the panel is." The corner of her mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile. "Do you?" He looked at her steadily. I can find it. She studied him another moment, then nodded once, the way people nod when they've collected the information they needed and are already moving on to the next thing. She let the door swing shut behind her, and her footsteps resumed down the hallway, receding. Marcus stood in the stairwell for 2 more seconds, then continued up. He found the panel in 4 minutes. He reset it in 3. He was back on his route before midnight. The building was officially called the Meridian Center, though the Voss Capital Management signage on floors 4 through 7 had quietly colonized most people's working vocabulary, so that now even the parking attendants in the basement called it the Voss Building, which was the kind of territorial linguistic drift that Marcus had observed in 3 other companies before this one, and which, in his experience, reliably predicted a particular kind of institutional overconfidence. When a company started naming the ground it stood on after itself, it had usually begun to confuse the container for the thing contained. He did not share this observation with anyone. He was officially an employee of Clean Line Services, one of 4 contracted vendors that handled facilities maintenance for the building. His designation was Night Crew Lead, which meant he was responsible for floors 4 through 7 between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., with an additional rotation on the lobby and the 2 basement levels on Wednesdays and Fridays. The pay was $22.50 an hour, which was 90 cents above the Clean Line standard rate, because his supervisor, a tired, decent man named Phil Garrett, had bumped him after Marcus reorganized the supply closet on 3 into a system so logical that Phil had spent 10 minutes staring at it before saying, "Nobody told you to do this." And Marcus had said, "No." And Phil had not asked more questions, which was one of the many things Marcus appreciated about Phil. The work was physical in a way that his body had needed to relearn at 36. That first month after the hospital, after the settlement, after the apartment in Pilsen that was a significant reduction from the condo in Lincoln Park, but which had 2 bedrooms and good light in the mornings. He had taken the first job that didn't require a background check into a gap-free employment history, which Clean Line did not do rigorously as long as you showed up. His hands had known what to do even when his mind was still catching up to the shape of the new life. There was a clarity to physical work, a feedback loop so direct it was almost kind. You mopped the floor was clean. You could see the evidence of your effort without waiting for a quarterly review. He had not expected to still be doing it at 44. He had not expected a lot of things. The incident with the freight elevator happened on a Friday, not a week later, as Marcus had estimated, but 4 days. He was on 6 when the alarm started. Not a loud alarm, just the soft, persistent chime that the elevator system used to signal a fault condition. The kind of sound that most people would have to look up in the building manual to identify. Marcus identified it in approximately 3 seconds because he had been present in the building services meeting in 2015 when that specific alarm tone had been selected. A meeting he had attended in a different capacity than the one he held now. He found the freight elevator doors standing open on 6, stuck mid-cycle, and a Clean Line colleague named Renata standing beside her supply cart looking irritated and late. "It just stopped," Renata said. "I know." He set his bucket to the side, opened the narrow access panel to the left of the elevator door frame, the one that most people didn't know existed because it was flush with the wall and had been painted over twice, and found the door logic controller exactly where it had been in 2015. And before that in 2012, when the system was first installed under a contract that Marcus had helped review. He pressed the reset sequence, 3 buttons in a specific order that was not printed anywhere accessible to the general public. The doors slid closed. After a moment, the chime went silent. Renata stared at the panel, then at him. "Where did you learn that?" "Building's been around a while," Marcus said. He closed the panel and went back to his bucket. Renata watched him go with the expression of someone assembling a question they weren't sure they should ask. 2 floors above, Nadia Voss stepped out of the main elevator into the 6th floor hallway, tablet under her arm, and nearly walked into the tail end of the moment. She saw Marcus's back retreating down the corridor. She saw Renata still staring. She filed it in the same place she had filed the stairwell conversation, and the maintenance ticket that had appeared in the building services system that morning attributed to a night crew lead named M. Del Rey, and the note that had been attached to the ticket. Condensation at HVAC elbow, 3rd week. Recommend insulation wrap replacement before cable tray on sub 4 is compromised. The note was written in the kind of clean, precise, technical language that building services personnel did not, in her experience, typically produce. She went back to her office and looked up the Clean Line contract. She found the name Marcus Del Rey listed as Night Crew Lead, hire date 18 months ago, and nothing else. No prior employment history. Clean Line didn't require it. No credentials on file. No emergency contact beyond a daughter listed as Lily Del Rey, age 17. She sat with that for a moment, then put her tablet down and went back to the earnings report she'd been reviewing. Because there were 12 things that needed her attention before 7 a.m., and a janitor who knew elevator maintenance was not, she told herself, the most pressing of them. But she didn't stop noticing. She came back to it 11 days later after the conversation with Dion. She hadn't planned to talk to Dion. She'd gone down to the security desk at 11:15 to check whether the overnight visitor log was being maintained correctly, which it wasn't. And the conversation had drifted the way late-night conversations in near-empty buildings sometimes do to the general subject of the night staff. And Dion had said unprompted, "You know, Mr. Del Rey knew the old name for the server room." Nadia had looked up from the log. "What do you mean, old name?" "Room 4B. We used to call it the cold room from before my time, before they renamed it for the renovation. Mr. Del Rey called it that the other night, first time I heard someone say it since Hector retired. Hector was here like 15 years. Dion had shrugged. "Probably just something he picked up." "Probably," Nadia said. She did not say the renovation that renamed Room 4B happened in 2017, 3 years before Clean Line took over this contract. Which means that if Marcus Del Rey picked up the name from someone at Clean Line, that someone would have had to know the building under the previous facilities contract, which ended in 2019. She did not say any of that. She wrote it down later in the small notebook she kept for things that didn't have a category yet. The name at the top of the page was M. Del Rey. Below it, she had written 3 questions. The last one was, who was here before 2019? She did not yet know that she was the wrong person to be asking that question. She did not yet know that the right person already knew the answer and was currently on the 5th floor in the small supply closet next to the restroom marked maintenance only, eating a peanut butter sandwich out of a paper bag and reading a novel about a man who builds a lighthouse on an island where there is no sea. What Derek Host protects. Derek Host arrived at the office at 7:15 every morning, without exception, which was early enough to signal commitment and late enough to avoid seeming anxious about it. A calibration he had maintained for 11 of his 16 years at Voss Capital. He was 51, silver-templed, the kind of physically fit that required visible effort, and he wore his authority the way some men wore an expensive watch, not to tell time, but to be seen wearing it. He was in Nadia's schedule for 8:30, a standing operational check-in, and he arrived 2 minutes early, which he always did, and which Nadia had noticed had the effect of compressing her last 2 minutes of preparation into 1. She suspected this was intentional. She had not yet decided what to do about it. "The ransomware assessment from IT came back," she said before he'd finished sitting down. "They're recommending a full architecture review of the bypass protocols. I want to get ahead of that before the board sees the preliminary." Derek set his coffee down. "The assessment is thorough. I've already reviewed it. My recommendation is we handle it internally. Bring in Garrett's facilities team for the physical layer audit and keep the digital layer review inside IT. No outside contractors, given what's at stake reputationally." I wasn't thinking outside contractors. I was thinking about the person who actually kept us from catastrophic data loss 3 weeks ago. She paused, letting that sit the way she let most things sit, not for dramatic effect, but because she'd learned that silence in a room with Derek Holst consistently produced more information than a direct question. He took a small sip of coffee. The night cleaning staff member, Marcus Del Rey, a fortunate intervention. He said it with the particular flatness of someone who has rehearsed a characterization. He happened to be on the floor, heard the alarms, and managed to locate the right reset sequence. Lucky for us. Lucky, Nadia said. These older systems, the console interfaces, the manual bypass logic, it's not entirely impossible that someone with general technical aptitude and enough nights in the building might piece together how they work by observation. It's more likely than the alternative. What's the alternative? Derek smiled the patient smile of a man who considered himself good at managing people, which meant, in practice, that he was good at making them feel that their questions had been answered when they hadn't been. There isn't one that makes operational sense. The man is a contract janitor. I think you're right that we should follow up with Cleanline to express our appreciation, a note, perhaps a bonus on the contract. Whatever Phil Garrett's arrangement allows, but I wouldn't inflate it into something it isn't. Nadia looked at him for a moment. I've already reached out to Cleanline, she said. I asked them not to change his assignment. A pause. Minimal, controlled. Of course, Derek said. Good thinking. He left at 8:52. 40 minutes later, Nadia's assistant forwarded her an email from Cleanline's account manager confirming a request from Voss Capital's operations division to reassign the night crew lead on floors 4 through 7, effective the following Monday, citing ongoing service quality concerns. The request had been submitted at 9:04 that morning, 12 minutes after Derek Holst left her office. She read the email twice. Then she picked up her phone. Marcus knew about the reassignment request before Nadia did. Phil Garrett had called him at 7 in the evening while Marcus was making dinner pasta from a box with the jar sauce that Lily had been campaigning against for 3 years on the grounds that it was food adjacent at best, a phrase she had apparently acquired from the internet and deployed with great satisfaction whenever he reached for it. He had the phone wedged between his ear and his shoulder and the sauce on the burner, and Lily at the kitchen table doing what appeared to be calculus, though it also appeared to be happening in a notebook decorated with small drawings of frogs, which Marcus had decided was none of his business. I'm sorry, Marcus, Phil said. He genuinely was. Phil's apologies had a specific texture, worn smooth from use, but not hollow. They came in through the corporate channel, not through me. I pushed back, but the account manager says it's a billing code issue that has to get processed. It's not a billing code issue, Marcus said. I know. It's all right, Phil. I can put you on the Millennium Park building rotation. It's not the same hours, but it's... I'll figure it out. He stirred the sauce. Don't worry about it. He hung up and stood at the stove for a moment, aware of Lily watching him from the table with the particular kind of peripheral attention she had developed over years of monitoring his moods without appearing to monitor them. The same skill he had, the same inheritance they'd passed back and forth between them in that small apartment, like a coin worn smooth from handling. Switching buildings, she asked, eyes still technically on the calculus. Maybe. Okay. She turned a page. The frogs continued their border patrol around the margins of her notes. Is it because of the thing that happened? The night they had the computer problem? He looked at her. Where did you hear about that? You came home smelling like server room, which smells like cold metal and old carpet, which is different from regular floor cold metal and regular floor carpet, which I know because you also smell like that on the rare occasion you fix something that isn't technically your job. She looked up then, brief and direct, the dark eyes she'd gotten from him and the calm she'd earned on her own. I'm not worried. I just notice things. She had been saying that to him since she was 9 years old from a hospital bed with an IV in her arm. I notice things, Dad. I notice the nurse always checks the chart before the vitals, not after. Smart enough at 9 to watch the system, brave enough at 9 to name what she saw, and he had loved her so completely in that moment that the love had felt less like an emotion and more like a structural fact, something load-bearing. "You're fine," he said. "Eat." She went back to the frogs and the calculus. Marcus set 2 bowls on the table and sat across from her, and neither of them said anything else about it. He would start making calls tomorrow. He'd been at the Voss building for 18 months, which was long enough, which was longer than he usually let himself stay in one place. He'd known when Dion had first mentioned the cold room to him, watched the old security guard's eyes flicker with the particular curiosity of someone who had just noticed something didn't fit, that he was leaving a track wider than he meant. 18 months, and now someone had noticed. It had been time to go anyway. He told himself this with the fluency of long practice and almost believed it. Nadia found him on Thursday, 2 days before the reassignment was set to take effect. She came to the 4th floor at 11:30, which she told herself was because she was working late anyway, and which was true, and which was not the whole reason. She found him in the east corridor near the copy room, running the floor buffer with the specific, unhurried competence he brought to every task she'd observed him performing, which was the competence of someone whose mind was elsewhere, while his hands remembered exactly what to do. She waited until he brought the buffer to a natural stop. She'd noticed he didn't like being interrupted mid-motion. Not from any visible irritation, but from the small, precise way he completed the stroke before acknowledging. And then she said, "I know about the reassignment request." He looked at her, said nothing. "It wasn't my request," she said. "I want you to know that." "I appreciate you saying so." His voice was even. She had learned in the past weeks that evenness was not in Marcus Del Rey's case the absence of feeling, but the presence of a decision. A decision made somewhere deeper than the moment, held with the consistency of something structural. "I'd like to understand what happened that night," she said. "The bypass you used on the console, the specific sequence you ran. That's not something you find by observation." A pause. Long enough to be intentional, short enough to be deniable. "I was a quick study," he said. "I don't doubt that." She looked at him directly, the way she looked at people when she decided to stop being tactical and be accurate instead. "I also know that room 4B used to be called the cold room, before 2017, before your employer held this contract." Something moved across his face so small and so fast that she almost missed it. Not alarm, not calculation. Something quieter and older and more resigned than either. "It's a common nickname," he said. "Marcus." She said his name the way you say something you've been holding carefully for a while and have finally decided to set down. "I'm not trying to put you in a difficult position. I'm genuinely trying to understand what I'm looking at. Because what I saw that night in the server room was not luck. I've been around enough people who are very good at things to know the difference between a person who happens to stumble onto a solution and a person who navigates to one from memory." He looked at the floor buffer for a moment, then back at her. When he spoke, his voice was still even, but the decision behind it had shifted the way the grain of wood shifts when you look at it from a different angle. "The reassignment goes through Monday either way," he said. "There's nothing to understand that changes that. There might be something I can do about the reassignment. I wouldn't ask you to." The firmness in it was total and without apology. "Ma'am," she almost argued. She had the argument ready, had been building it since the email at 9 that morning. But something in the quality of his refusal, the lack of bitterness in it, the way it held no expectation that she would override it, as if he had long since made his peace with the idea that what was fair and what happened were frequently unrelated, stopped her. "I'll ask you one question," she said. "You don't have to answer it. Does the name work that you did in this building, in this specific building, feel familiar to you?" He didn't look away. "Good night, Miss Voss," he said. He turned the buffer back on. She stood in the corridor for 3 more seconds, and then she walked back to the elevator, and in the elevator she wrote 2 words in her notebook. Who signed? The night the system went dark. The attack began at 3:14 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, when Chicago had decided to commit to winter early, and the windows of the Meridian Center were running with cold rain, and the building held that particular emptiness that only buildings working in the gap between midnight and dawn can hold, a stillness that isn't silence so much as the absence of the usual human noise that buildings absorb all day and slowly exhale at night. Marcus was on 6. He'd been on 6 for 40 minutes, working through the open plan workspace that Voss Capital's analytics team occupied during the day, a floor he'd come to know the way he knew most things in this building, by its routines, its particular collection of left-behind objects, the overnight charging patterns of laptops, and the way the desk plants in the northeast corner were quietly dying because no one watered them on the weekends. He'd started watering them himself, which was not in his job description, which he had not mentioned to anyone. He heard the alarm at 3:16. It wasn't the building alarm, not the fire safety system or the intruder alert that Dion managed from downstairs. It was the server room's internal monitoring tone, a low cycling pulse that most people in the building had never heard, because the server room was effectively a closed system, accessed only by IT staff with keycard clearance, and the alarm was designed to alert them, not the general population. Marcus heard it because he knew what it was. And he knew what it was because he'd been in the planning meeting where the monitoring frequency had been selected, chosen to sit below the range that would cause alarm fatigue in people who passed the room regularly, but above the threshold of the low-frequency ambient hum of the building's HVAC. It was a small, specific thing to know, and it told him within approximately 15 seconds that something was wrong with the system's core authentication layer. He pushed the bucket to the side. He checked his watch. Then he walked to the server room. The keycard panel was locked as expected. What was not locked was the emergency access port beside it, a physical interface that predated the current keycard system installed during the original 2012 build as a failsafe for exactly the kind of scenario in which the digital access layer might itself be compromised. Most people in the current IT department did not know it existed. It was not in the documentation that CleanLine had provided him, obviously. It was in the documentation that Marcus Del Rey had written in 2013 in a 14-page risk addendum to the facility's governance protocol, a document that was either still buried in the company's archival system or had been deleted in one of the 3 major system migrations since then. He didn't know which. He knew the access sequence for the port from memory because he had written the sequence, and because the things you write from first principles tend to stay in the body differently than things you learn from reading. Inside the server room was cool and loud in the way of all server rooms, the kind of noise that doesn't register as loud in the moment because it's too constant to spike the attention, but that you feel in your teeth after 10 minutes. The monitoring console was in the back left corner, the same position it had occupied since 2012, though the hardware had been upgraded twice. The console ran on a text interface, no graphical layer, the kind of screen that looked primitive to anyone trained after 2010, and which Marcus had always preferred because it didn't hide what the system was actually doing behind an abstraction layer designed for people who didn't want to know. What the system was actually doing at 3:19 in the morning was losing. The ransomware had hit the authentication server first. Standard approach intelligently executed, and was now propagating laterally through the transaction processing layer at a rate that suggested it had found the internal subnet map, which meant it either had or was close to having enough access to begin encrypting the archive backups. The monitoring log scrolled in amber text, line after line of access denied, process terminated, escalation failed, in the particular rhythm of a system defending itself against something larger and faster than its defenses were designed to handle. Marcus pulled his notebook out of his jacket pocket. It was a composition notebook, the kind you could get at any drugstore, black and white cover, gone soft at the corners from years of being carried in jacket pockets and set down on concrete floors, and occasionally, in the first years, left in hospital waiting rooms and retrieved 3 days later, unchanged. He opened it to a page roughly 2/3 through and found the entry he was looking for, written in his own handwriting, in the compressed, highly legible script he'd developed in graduate school because he'd been too broke for a printer and had learned early that the quality of notes you took in a meeting was the quality of what you remembered 6 months later in a different meeting. The entry was a bypass sequence for the transaction layer's secondary authentication route. He had written it in 2016 during a security audit as a contingency procedure in case of exactly this category of attack. He had flagged it in the risk management playbook as a known vulnerability and had specified that the bypass should be used only by personnel with governance clearance and only as a recovery tool, not a workaround. Below the sequence, he had written, "This is the seam. If anything gets through here, the response time is everything." He began typing. Nadia had been in the building since midnight. This was not unusual. The Singapore acquisition was in its final due diligence phase, and Singapore ran on a time zone that required her to either be available at 3 in the afternoon or at 3 in the morning. And she had found in 14 months at Voss Capital that she was more useful at 3 in the morning than she was at 3 in the afternoon. Partly because her mind worked better then, and partly because there was nobody around at 3 in the morning to interrupt the actual thinking with the performance of thinking. She was in her office on 7 when her computer went dark. Not sleep dark, not the gradual dimming of an idle screen, but the specific, immediate black of a forced system disconnect. Every window collapsing at once, the way a room goes dark when the power is cut, rather than when the lights are turned off. She stared at the screen for 3 seconds, her mind assembling the data points with the rapid, unglamorous efficiency of someone who had been through 2 corporate crises before this job and knew the difference between a bad moment and a bad night. Then she stood up and reached for her phone. IT picked up on the 4th ring, which told her the situation on their end was already worse than she was hoping for. "We're seeing a ransomware event in the transaction layer," the on-call engineer said, and she could hear in his voice the particular combination of adrenaline and controlled panic that comes from being responsible for a system that is actively deteriorating. "We're locked out of the primary console. The encryption is bypass. We're trying to identify the secondary access route. The documentation for the older console hardware is." "Where are you physically?" We're all remote, Ms. Voss. The building access system is also locked down. We can't." She hung up and took the stairs to 6. The server room door was standing open when she got there, which was the first thing that stopped her, because the server room door was not supposed to be open. Was not supposed to be openable by anyone who wasn't on the IT access list. And she was not on the IT access list because she'd been told that executive access to the physical server room created a governance liability. A decision she had accepted at the time and was currently finding inconvenient. The second thing that stopped her was the sound. Typing. Fast, precise, and continuous. The kind of typing that people who have spent decades working in text interface environments produce. Not the intermittent, self-correcting rhythm of someone composing something, but the fluid, near-automatic rhythm of someone who knows exactly what they're putting in and is only constrained by the speed at which their hands can execute it. She came around the rack of servers and found Marcus Del Rey sitting at the monitoring console, jacket folded over the back of the chair, the small composition notebook open on the desk beside him, one hand on the keyboard and the other holding the notebook flat while he worked. He did not look up when she entered. He was reading something from the notebook and translating it directly into the console line by line with the focused, resource-conservative concentration of someone who could not afford to divide their attention. She stood back and did not speak. He worked for 22 more minutes. The amber scroll on the monitor gradually changed, not dramatically, not with the cinematic clarity of a Hollywood hack the mainframe sequence, but incrementally, the way a tide actually turns. One line of access restored, then a process restarted, then an authentication node coming back online. Each small recovery cascading into the next, because the underlying architecture, she would understand later, had been designed by someone who understood that systems under attack need layered fallback positions, and that the most important thing about a fallback is that it be positioned before you need it. At 3:58, the primary monitoring log cleared. At 4:01, Marcus closed the notebook, stood up, and stretched his back with the weary, unremarkable gesture of a man who had been sitting in a hard chair. He turned around and found Nadia Voss standing 6 feet away. And for a moment, neither of them moved. The server room noise filled the space between them. Cold air, amber light from the console. The rain against the single high window was still going relentless and without comment. Nadia spoke first. "Who are you?" He looked at her. His face was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, and everything to do with something longer and harder than a single night. A tiredness that sat in the bones rather than the eyes, the kind that doesn't resolve with sleep. "Night crew," he said. "That's not what I asked." He picked up his notebook, slid it into his jacket pocket. He retrieved the jacket from the back of the chair and put it on with the unhurried, deliberate movements of a man buying himself time to decide something. And she watched him decide it, watched the moment pass through him and settle into the same answer he'd been giving for 8 years, the answer that was also a wall. And also, she was beginning to understand. A kind of protection, though she didn't yet know exactly what it was protecting and from what. "The primary transaction layer is restored," he said. "The secondary backups will need a manual integrity check from your IT team, but the encryption didn't reach them. You should be operational by 6. He moved toward the door, unhurried, unhurried, unhurried. The single most consistent thing about him. "You'll want to change the emergency port access sequence in the morning. Right now, it's the one from the original installation." He said this the way you mention a fact about a building to someone who was responsible for it, casually, as if it was simply useful information being passed along, as if it were not also the most precise possible indication of exactly how long and from how deep inside the architecture he had been speaking. He walked out. She stood in the server room for 45 seconds listening to the cooling fans, and then she took out her notebook and added 3 words below the 2 she'd written 4 days ago. He wrote it. 40 minutes later, Derek Holst arrived in the building. She heard him in the lobby from her office, his voice, and then Phil Garrett's, and then a silence that had a particular quality to it, the quality of an instruction being given, rather than a conversation being had. She went to her window and looked down at the street. It was still raining. The pre-dawn city was the color of graphite, and the color of things that had been wet for a long time. She thought about the notebook, the handwriting, the sequence typed from memory with the precision of someone reading a text they had authored, not studied. The offhand mention of the original installation. "Right now, it's the one from the original installation, said the way you say it when you mean, and I know because I was there for the original installation." She thought about the reassignment request that had gone through Monday, and the email she'd blocked with the countermand that was now, she was almost certain, going to be challenged again. She thought about Derek's voice in the lobby just now, issuing an instruction to a building services manager at 4:15 in the morning. She opened the company's archival system and typed the oldest search term she could think of. Risk Management Playbook, original document, 2013 to 2016. The search returned one result. The file was corrupted, not deleted, she noted, because deleted could be recovered, but corrupted, which was a more deliberate action. The file name still readable in the index. VCM_risk_playbook_V1_final_MDELRAY_2016. She stared at that file name for a long time. MDELRAY. Outside, the rain kept going. the notebook with his name on it. She went to Pilsen on a Friday afternoon because the building reassignment had finally gone through. She'd blocked it twice, but Derek had found a contractual angle through the vendor management clause that her legal team had confirmed was technically within his authority. And because she'd been sitting on what she'd found in the archive index for 9 days and doing nothing with it felt at this point like a choice she would be unable to defend to herself later. She had Marcus's address from the Clean Line employee file. She was aware that showing up at someone's home without warning was a violation of several social and professional norms that she generally respected. She was also aware that the alternative was watching a man whose name was on the foundational document of her company's risk infrastructure disappear into another building contract in a different part of the city, and that this was a thing she was not willing to do without at least trying to understand it first. She rang the buzzer at the street door of the 3 flat on West 23rd at 2 in the afternoon. There was a pause, and then a voice over the intercom. Not Marcus's voice. A younger voice, careful and unalarmed. Yes? I am looking for Marcus Del Rey. My name is Nadia Voss. Another pause, longer, then. He's not home right now. He's running an errand. A beat. But you can come up if you want. I'm his daughter. Lily Del Rey was taller than Nadia had expected and more composed, and she made tea without being asked, which Nadia suspected was a reflex from years of managing visitors to a household that had required managing the particular efficiency of a person who had learned early to be the steady one in a room. She was 17 and looked like her father around the eyes, and like someone who had processed more than 17 years' worth of experience around the mouth. The slight steadiness there that didn't belong to adolescence. The apartment was clean and small and very specific. Books on 2 shelves organized not by subject or alphabet, but by some system Nadia couldn't immediately decode. Later, looking back, she would decide they were organized by when they'd been read, oldest on the left, most recent on the right. A timeline in paper and ink. A kitchen table that served also as a desk. On the table, a calculus textbook with a cover made of brown paper bag, the way students used to cover textbooks when the covers were school property. And a notebook that was not the calculus homework opened to a page covered in careful handwriting and precise small diagrams that Nadia recognized with a quiet jolt as network topology schematics. She looked at Lily. He teaches me things, Lily said simply. She set a mug in front of Nadia. When I ask, does he teach you from notes? Lily glanced at the notebook on the table, then back at Nadia with the controlled expression of someone deciding how much of a thing to confirm. He has a lot of notes, she said. He keeps them in an old composition notebook. He's been writing in it since before I was born, basically. She paused. Is that what you're here about? Nadia looked at the tea. It was the moment to be careful, and she knew it. And she also knew that careful was not the same as dishonest, and that Lily Del Rey had the kind of eyes that would register the difference. Partly, she said. I work in the building where your father has been working. I need to understand something about the work he did before he came there. Something passed Lily's face, not surprise exactly. More like the expression of someone who has been waiting for a thing to arrive and is noting with a kind of tired relief that it has finally come. She stood up, went to the bedroom door at the end of the short hallway, and came back carrying a composition notebook. Not the one Marcus had used in the server room. That one was in his jacket. This one was older, the cover almost colorless from handling, the spine repaired at some point with electrical tape. She set it on the table between them. He left that one at home, Lily said. I've seen him look at it sometimes late at night. He thinks I'm asleep. She sat back down. I never read it, but I think you probably should. Nadia opened it. The first 40 pages were technical system architecture notes, risk assessment frameworks, mitigation protocols, all dated between 2012 and 2016, all written in the same compressed, precise handwriting she'd seen on the console entries in the archived file index. The diagrams were immaculate. The commentary was the commentary of someone who understood not just how a system worked, but why it had been built the way it had been built, and what would happen to it when the people who built it were no longer there to explain the reasoning behind the decisions. On page 42, the handwriting changed. Not the hand, the same hand, but the register. The entries became less technical and more personal. The kind of writing that happens in the margins between the professional life and the one that's actually being lived. Brief entries, dated March 14, 2016. Lily's counts are still not where they need to be. Dr. Okonkwo says we have 4 to 6 weeks before the next bone marrow assessment. The insurance has denied the claim for the second round of induction therapy. I'm appealing. I have been appealing for 11 weeks. March 22, 2016. They've offered a settlement. Not a settlement for the insurance denial, a different thing. Holst came to me directly, which means they know I know about the coverage gap, and they want it contained. The offer is $200,000 against the cost of treatment in exchange for a full departure, an NDA, and reassignment of all IP developed in my capacity as CRO, including the playbook. I asked for 48 hours. March 23, 2016. I asked Dr. Okonkwo what happens if we don't start the next round within the month. She told me. I told her I'd have the authorization to her office by end of day Friday. March 24, 2016. Signed. Lily doesn't know. She thinks I resigned for a different reason. I told her the company was restructuring, which was true enough, that I didn't feel like I was lying to her, which is the kind of thing you tell yourself when you've been very tired for a very long time. Nadia stopped reading. She sat with the notebook open in front of her and was quiet for a moment with the weight of what she just understood, which was not just the facts of what Marcus Del Rey had done, but the full geometry of it, the settlement offered precisely when he was most vulnerable. The amount calibrated to the cost of his daughter's survival. The IP clause that had taken everything he had built and put Voss Capital's name on it. And the man himself walking back into that building 18 months ago, mopping the floors of a place that was running on his architecture and paying him $22.50 an hour to clean up after people who had never heard his name. She heard the key in the apartment door. Marcus came in carrying a paper grocery bag, and he saw Nadia Voss sitting at his kitchen table with his notebook open in front of her, and he put the bag down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands need to be doing something while your mind catches up. Lily had stood up the moment she'd heard the key. She looked at her father the way someone looks when they've done something that was necessary and also irreversible. "She works in your building," Lily said. She seemed like she needed to see it. Marcus looked at the notebook, then at Nadia, then for a brief moment at the window, and Nadia had the clear sense that what he was looking at was not the window, but the shape of the situation, the distance between where things had been an hour ago and where they were now, and what could and could not be walked back. "Lily," he said, "can you give us a few minutes?" Lily nodded, picked up the calculus textbook and went to her room. The door did not fully close. Marcus sat down at the table across from Nadia, not at the chair beside her. Across. He folded his hands. "She didn't do anything wrong," he said. "Don't. I know she didn't," Nadia said. "The NDA is still enforceable." "I know that too." He looked at the notebook. He looked at it the way you look at something that has been yours for a long time and that you can see is in the process of becoming something else. "Then I'm not sure what you're expecting from this conversation." "I'm not expecting anything from you," she said. "I'm trying to decide what I owe you." Something moved across his face. A reflex he controlled almost instantly, but not completely. And what she saw in the fraction of a second before he controlled it was not the calculation of a man weighing an offer, but the reflexive flinch of a man who had learned to distrust the word "owe" in the context of his own name. It passed, and the evenness returned. But she had seen it, and she noted it. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Marcus." She said his name the same way she'd said it in the building corridor, the way you say the name of something you've been carrying carefully. "Your intellectual property is running the company I'm responsible for. The settlement you signed in 2016 was offered to you at the precise moment your daughter's life depended on accepting it. That's not a transaction, that's—" She stopped. "That's something Derek Holst did, and something my predecessor allowed, and something I didn't know about when I took this job, but I know about it now." He was quiet for a long time. The apartment held its smallness around them. From behind the partially closed door came the sound of Lily turning a page. "If you move against Holst," Marcus said finally, "he'll invoke the NDA. He'll have to, because the only way the NDA protects him is if it also protects the company, and the moment you acknowledge that the settlement was coercive, the company's exposure goes up. The board will back him to limit that exposure. You'll lose that fight, or you'll win it at a cost that you're 14 months in." He looked at her. "I've watched you work. You're trying to fix real things. If you burn your equity on me, you lose the ability to fix the other things." It was the most she had ever heard him say at once. And it was, she noted, not an argument for his own protection, but an argument for hers, which was the real one. More than the notebook or the handwriting or the playbook with his name on it. He was right now in the middle of his own life being reconsidered, and his primary concern was whether fighting for him would cost her something. "I'm going to look into what can be done," she said. "And I'd like to take the notebook." He looked at it. Then he looked at her. The consideration on his face was not of someone deciding whether to trust her. It was of someone who had already decided and was simply observing the decision happening. He slid the notebook across the table. "There's a date on the playbook entry," he said. "March 14th, 2016. "I see it." The IP transfer was a separate clause from the NDA. "The NDA requires my silence. The IP transfer gave the company ownership of the work." He paused. "But there's nothing in either document that prevents the company from choosing to acknowledge the work's origin." She looked at him. "You've thought about this?" "I've had 8 years," he said. She stood up. She picked up the notebook. She was at the door when his voice came quieter than usual and without any of the evenness, or rather, with a different kind of evenness, the kind that comes after something very difficult has been said rather than before it. "She doesn't know," he said. "About the settlement. She thinks I left because of the restructuring." A pause. "I'd prefer she continue to think that." Nadia turned and looked at him. He was looking at the table. "All right," she said. She left. In the hallway before the stairs, she stopped and leaned against the wall for a moment with the notebook against her chest, and thought about a man who had signed away the work of 4 years of his life and walked into that building 18 months ago and mopped the floors above the system he had built and had not told anyone, and had not planned to. Had not planned to until a ransomware attack at 3 in the morning had made it impossible to be less than what he was. She thought about the entry from March 23rd. "I told her I'd have the authorization to her office by end of day Friday." He hadn't protected the work. He'd protected the child. And then for 8 years, he'd made himself small enough not to have to choose between them again. She walked down the stairs and out into the November street and stood in the cold air for a moment. And then she started making phone calls. What a name is worth. The call that mattered went to her general counsel at 7:45 on Saturday morning. And by Sunday night, Nadia had what she needed, a legal opinion, 41 pages concluding that while the NDA remained enforceable as written, the IP transfer clause contained a provision standard in employment agreements of that era that permitted the originating party to seek attribution without violating the confidentiality terms, so long as attribution did not constitute disclosure of the settlement terms themselves. In short, Marcus Del Rey could not publicly discuss the settlement. The company could choose to publicly credit him for the work. It was a gap, not a door. But it was something. What it was not was a gap that Derek Holst would accept without a fight. Scene 1. She called the board meeting for Monday at 8 a.m., which was early enough to signal that this was not a procedural matter and not so late in the day that anyone could claim prior commitments. 8 people in the 32nd floor conference room, the one with the view of the lake that was on a November Monday the color of something that had given up on being blue. Derek was there, and beside him was Peter Stanhope, the board member who had been on the company's compensation committee in 2016 and whose name appeared in Nadia's copy of the settlement documentation as the second signatory. She had not told either of them why the meeting had been called. She placed the composition notebook on the table in front of her and put the legal opinion beside it and said, "I want to discuss the origin of our risk management architecture." Derek looked at the notebook. His face did what trained faces do under pressure. It stayed almost entirely still. The almost was in the jaw and in the way his right hand moved to his coffee cup and then did not pick it up. "Our risk management architecture," he said in the voice of a man who has decided that tone is his best available weapon, "was developed internally by our operations and technology teams over a period of several years. It's been iterated significantly since its original form." "It's been iterated," Nadia said. The original framework, the one the iterations were built on, was developed by Marcus Del Rey in his capacity as Chief Risk Officer between 2012 and 2016. She opened the notebook. "This is his original documentation. It predates every version in our current system. The file index in our archive shows the original playbook file name as VCM_risk_playbook_V1_final_MDELRAY_2016. She looked at the table. "I'd like someone to tell me why his name isn't on the current version." Silence. It was the specific silence of a room in which several people are deciding simultaneously what the least costly version of the truth might be. Peter Stanhope spoke. He was 63, silver-haired, and had the voice of a man who considered himself skilled at reframing. "There was a departure agreement in 2016, he said. Standard procedure when a senior executive leaves IP developed in the course of employment is retained by the company. This isn't unusual." The departure agreement was offered to Mr. Del Rey while he was in the process of appealing a denied insurance claim for his daughter's cancer treatment, Nadia said. The settlement amount was $200,000, which was equal to the cost of the treatment the company's own insurance had declined to cover. She let that sit for 3 full seconds. "I want someone at this table to tell me that's a standard departure agreement." Another silence. Longer this time. Derek set his coffee down. "What's the purpose of this exercise, Nadia?" His voice had dropped to the register he used when he was done managing and starting to threaten. "The agreement was legally executed. The IP belongs to the company. Whatever your feelings about the circumstances..." "My feelings aren't the subject," she said. "The subject is that we have a man who built the foundational risk architecture of this company, currently working as a contract janitor in our building, having been denied his own insurance benefit when he needed it, and having signed over his intellectual property in exchange for the money the company should have paid his insurer in the first place." She looked at Derek directly. "And 3 weeks ago, when that architecture was the only thing standing between us and the catastrophic ransomware event, he was the one who saved it. Because our own IT department didn't know the bypass existed." Derek looked back at her. "You're describing a breach of the NDA," he said. "He interacted with proprietary systems under a confidentiality agreement. We have legal recourse." Nadia looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to be said. "You want to sue the man who saved the company?" she said, "in front of this board. Please clarify that that's what you're recommending." The silence this time was different. It had a texture. Two of the board members had exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that happens when people in a room are beginning to recalculate. "What I'm recommending," Derek said, "is that we handle this internally, without exposure, using the legal framework we have. The NDA exists for good reason. The NDA exists because you drafted it in 2016 to contain your own liability," Nadia said. "His insurance was denied under a plan that your department administered. The settlement you offered him was not a courtesy. It was a way to keep that failure from becoming a public claim." She'd known this would be the moment he would pivot. She was right. "I would encourage you," Derek said very quietly, "to be careful about unsubstantiated allegations in a formal board context." "I have the documentation," she said, "including the internal communications from March 2016 that I found during a governance audit last week. The ones that discussed the insurance denial and the recommended resolution." She looked at Peter Stanhope. "You were copied on those communications." Peter did not speak. "I'm not interested in litigation," Nadia said to the table. "I'm interested in one thing: authorizing an acknowledgement of Marcus Del Rey's contribution and a settlement review under the IP attribution provision that our general counsel has confirmed is available to us." She slid the legal opinion to the center of the table. "I'd like a vote." Derek looked at the opinion. He looked at Nadia. He was, she could see, still calculating, still looking for the move that would preserve his position while preventing hers from succeeding. It was the way he'd operated for 16 years, and she understood, watching it happen, that the reason it had worked for 16 years was that no one had ever made the cost of it visible in a room where it mattered. "If you move forward with this," he said, "I'll challenge your authority to call the review. The vendor management clause." "I replaced the vendor management clause in my first month," Nadia said. "You approved it in writing. Page 4 of the October 15th operations memo." Peter Stanhope put his hand flat on the table. "I'll support the attribution review," he said. His voice was steady and did not contain an apology, which Nadia noted, but it also did not contain a defense of Derek, which she also noted. "I'll support it on the condition that the board retains legal oversight of the process." 4 other members followed, one after another, the way things fall when the structure they were resting on shifts. Derek said nothing. He picked up his phone, pressed it to his ear as though taking a call, and stood up from the table. He did not look at Nadia as he left the room. She did not watch him go. She was already turning to the general counsel and beginning to discuss the process. Scene 2. She went to the building on Tuesday evening late, after the day shift had cleared and the night staff had come on. She found Marcus on 4, which was where she'd expected, and she did not interrupt the floor buffer this time but waited at the end of the corridor until he brought it to a natural stop. He looked at her. He didn't look surprised. He looked the way he'd looked in the apartment on Friday, like a man observing a situation he'd already thought through and is now watching arrive. "I'm not asking you to do anything public," she said. "The board voted this morning to authorize an IP attribution review. It's internal. It goes into the company's formal record. It affects how the playbook is documented and credited, and it opens a financial review of the 2016 settlement." She paused. "It requires your signature on one document, a statement confirming that the attribution is accurate and that you consent to the record correction." He was quiet. "That's all," she said. "It doesn't touch the NDA. It doesn't require you to make any public statement. It doesn't change what you do or where you work or anything about your life that you haven't chosen to change." He looked at the floor buffer. He looked at his hands. "Lily," he said, "the document is confidential. It won't be in anything she'd see." "That's not—" He stopped. He started again, and this time his voice was different, carrying something that had been kept out of it for so long that its presence changed the quality of the room. She thinks I left because the company was restructuring. She was 12. She was sick, and I needed her to believe that her father left a job because of a business decision, and not because of the thing that was actually happening. He looked at Nadia. If I sign a document that changes the record of why I left, there's a version of the future where she finds that record. And in that version, she learns that I told her something that wasn't true for 8 years. Nadia stood with that. She's going to be 18 in 4 months, Marcus said. She's looking at universities, engineering. He said the word with the specific texture of a pride so deep it had become a kind of ache. She has an interview with University of Chicago's Pritzker School in January. I know, Nadia said. I looked her up. He looked at her. She submitted an engineering portfolio, Nadia said. The faculty contact sent it to my office by mistake because she listed the Meridian Center as one of her structural interest references, which I thought was coincidental until I realized it probably wasn't. She reached into her jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. She wrote in the portfolio that her father had taught her to read building systems the way most people read books, by understanding not just what they said, but why they were written that way. He didn't move for a moment. Then he turned away from her slightly toward the window at the end of the corridor, toward the city below. And she gave him the 45 seconds it took for him to move through whatever he was moving through. Because she understood by now that he processed things like this privately and completely, and that interrupting the process would cost more than it helped. When he turned back, his face was composed, but the composition was different from usual. It was not the wall, not the careful evenness of a man managing what the outside could see. It was something quieter, something that had been put down. I can't sign it tonight, he said. I know. I need to talk to Lily first. I know that too. She reached into her jacket again and took out an envelope. This is the document. Take it home. Take the time you need. She held it out to him. And Marcus, whatever you decide, I want you to know that the board vote happened this morning regardless. Your contribution is on record now inside the company, with or without your signature on this. This document is just the part that goes beyond the company. The part that's yours to decide. He looked at the envelope. He took it with the care of someone who understands that the weight of a thing and its physical mass are not related. Ms. Voss, he said. Nadia. He tried it like a word in the language he was newly allowing himself to use. You should know that the bypass sequence I used in the server room, I changed it before I left that night. The new one is in the operations log. Your IT team will find it. He paused. I know you didn't ask. I wanted you to know the building is covered. She looked at him. Something that had been tight in her chest since the server room, since the archive file name, since the entry from March 24, 2016 in a composition notebook, came slightly loose. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and picked up the floor buffer. She took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the November night and stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her breath showing in the cold air. Around her, the city went about its ordinary, unremarkable business of being itself. The late-night traffic and the distant train and the smell of something frying from the diner on the corner. And she thought about a man upstairs with an envelope in his jacket pocket and a 17-year-old who read building systems like books. And she walked to her car. Scene 3. He told Lily on Thursday, not at the kitchen table, not in the apartment. They went for a walk, which was what they'd always done when something needed space around it. Had been doing it since she was small enough to hold his hand for the whole length of it. Since the hospital years, when walking the corridor had been the only thing that felt like forward motion. They walked west on 23rd toward the park, collars up, the cold, doing the thing cold does in Chicago in November, which is less a temperature and more a posture, something you learn to walk inside of rather than against. He told her the whole thing. He didn't use the word settlement at first. He told it in order the way it had happened. The insurance denial and the appeal, and the 11 weeks and the offer and the notebook, and the reason he'd said yes, and what he'd said to her at 12 instead of what had actually happened. He told it without excuse or decoration, in the same voice he'd always used with her, the voice that assumed she was capable of receiving accurate information, which she had always been, more than he'd ever given her credit for, and which he was only now acknowledging he'd underestimated. She walked beside him and didn't say anything for a while. They crossed a street, paused for a light, kept walking. "The thing I told you," he said, "about the restructuring. I want you to understand that I wasn't protecting myself. I know what you were doing," Lily said. He looked at her. "I was 12, not 6, she said. "I knew something happened. I knew the version you gave me was the version you thought I could handle. I'm not angry about that." She pulled her coat tighter. "I'm a little angry about it, maybe. But not the way you think." "Tell me how." She was quiet for half a block. "I kept asking you for years when you were going to go back to doing something like what you used to do, something with systems or engineering or... I kept asking. And you kept saying you were fine, you were happy, everything was fine." She looked at him sideways, the way she'd been looking at him her whole life. "I knew you weren't. I just didn't know why." "Lily, I'm not saying that to make you feel bad," she said. "I'm saying it because you spent 8 years being smaller than you are, and I watched it, and I didn't know what was making you small, and now I do. And I'd rather know." She reached over and put her hand through his arm the way she used to do when she was 9 and walking beside him in the hospital hallway. "You gave me everything," she said. "I know that. I've always known that. You don't have to keep proving it by disappearing." He didn't answer right away. They walked another block. The park opened up ahead of them, the trees bare and very still in the cold air, and the sky above the city the particular non-color that Chicago skies became in November, not dark enough to be night yet, and not light enough to be anything else. "Miss Voss." "Nadia," he said. "She brought a document. It's in my jacket." "I know. I saw the envelope when you came home." She hadn't opened it, had not even touched it, he realized, had just noted it and waited, the way she did, the patience of someone who understood that things arrived when they were ready and not before. "What does it do?" "It puts my name on the work, officially, in the company record, and it opens a review of the settlement." He paused. "I'd have to sign it." She thought about that. "Would it fix anything?" "I don't know. Maybe a financial review of the settlement amount, attribution of the playbook." He looked at the bare trees. "It won't undo 8 years." "Nothing undoes anything," Lily said with the pragmatic certainty of a person who had spent time in a hospital at 9 years old, learning what reversible and irreversible meant in practice. "The question is whether it's true. Whether your name on that record is the true version." "Yes," he said. "Then sign it," she said. "Not from Ms. Voss or the company or whatever the settlement review does or doesn't do. Sign it because it's true, and you're allowed to have your name on true things." She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder the way she used to when she was small, and then stopped, and now did again sometimes, in the moments when the distance between them collapsed back to what it had always been before the years and the small apartment and the careful management of things had built up a decorum between them that neither of them entirely wanted. "You're allowed to be what you are, Dad." He stood in the cold park with his daughter's head on his shoulder for a moment that he did not try to measure or contain. Then they walked home. He signed the document on Friday and dropped it with Nadia's assistant before the building opened, which meant she found it on her desk at 7 in the morning under a post-it note that said, in the compressed, precise handwriting she'd learned to recognize from composition notebooks and console logs and network topology diagrams in a 17-year-old's calculus homework. N. Thank you for the building. It needed someone to run it right. MD. She held the post-it for a longer time than was strictly necessary. Then she put it in the composition notebook between page 42 and 43, where the handwriting changed. She reached him that afternoon by phone because she had one more thing to ask him. The operations position, she said. VP of Systems Risk. It's been vacant since July. I've been interviewing externally, and the candidates have been technically competent and have not known what they were looking at. She paused. You'd have to go through a formal process. HR, background check, the full procedure. There's a gap in the employment history that we'd need to document honestly. 8 years, he said. 8 years. She let it sit. I'm not asking you to accept it right now. I'm asking you to consider it. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear distantly the sound of the city behind him, street noise, a train, the particular sonic texture of Chicago in November. He was somewhere outside. I'd need to think about it, he said. Of course. And I'd need one thing in the process to be different from the standard interview procedure. Tell me. No panel interview, he said. I'm not good with being assessed by a room. She almost said, you were assessed by a room every night for 18 months by people who didn't know they were assessing you. She didn't say it. One-on-one, she said. With me. Then I'll think about it, he said. She heard something that might have been at a great distance, and without any excess, something close to relief. Not happiness. Marcus Del Rey's voice didn't do happiness, or at least not in any form she'd identified yet. But something loosening. The way a system sounds when it's back online after a clean restore, when the processes restart in the right order and the monitoring log comes back clear and everything begins without announcement to do what it was built to do. One more thing, she said, and this isn't a work question. All right. The Building Orientation for Pritzker Candidates, U of C, does a tour of notable Chicago buildings in the spring. The Meridian Center is on the list. They usually ask the building manager to walk the group. She paused. I was thinking about asking someone else. A silence, long and different from his other silences. I'll think about that too, he said. She could hear it in those 4 words. Not agreement, not refusal, but the sound of a man who was beginning, carefully and without ceremony, to allow himself to be in the room. It was a Saturday in April when Lily Del Rey stood in the lobby of the Meridian Center and looked up through 7 floors of glass and steel and poured concrete and the particular Chicago light of early spring, which comes in flat and clear from the lake and makes buildings look like they're thinking. Her father stood beside her. He had been officially vice president of systems risk at Voss Capital Management for 11 weeks, which was long enough for his name to be on the door of the office on 5 that had a window facing the building across the street and a plant that his assistant had put on the sill without being asked. He had not yet watered the plant, but he was thinking about it. They stood in the lobby while the other Pritzker candidates moved around them with their notebooks and their phones, taking pictures, asking their tour guide questions about the 2019 renovation and the structural engineering of the atrium. The standard questions. The surface questions. You want to start on 1 or go up to 7? He asked her. She looked at the ceiling of the lobby, at the way the light came through the glass facade and broke across the floor in long, flat panels. Where did you start? She asked. 1, he said. Always from the foundation. She nodded. Then 1. They moved toward the interior stairwell. Not the main elevator, not the freight elevator on the east side with its corrected door sensor, but the stairwell, Original to the 1987 construction, poured concrete and steel handrail, and the smell of structure doing what it was built to do. He held the door. "Did you miss it?" she asked, looking up the stairs. "When you were away from it?" He thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about things now, without the management, without the careful routing around what was actually true. The stairwell was cool and a little dim, and smelled of concrete and something older. "I missed being useful," he said. She turned and looked at him, and the look on her face was the look she'd had at 9 years old from a hospital bed, watching everything carefully and naming what she saw without flinching, clear-eyed and sure, and made of something that had been tested and had held. "You were always useful, Dad," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked up the stairs at the 7 floors of a building that still ran on what he had built, that had been running on it all along, that would go on running on it now with his name correctly attached to what he'd made. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you the cold room first." And they went up.